Now on BBC Two, a drama set in the near future. Based on extensive research, this film looks back on the terrible events of one day in December 2003, the day Britain stopped.
A lot of the area has been cordoned off. We've just been allowed through the police cordon.
On the 19th of December 2003, the failings of Britain's transport system were exposed as never before. Decades of neglect led to a day of disaster.
We had it coming, and a lot of people have said that, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. I don't think anything that occurred on the 19th individually would have surprised me. But I really believe there's no way we could have foreseen that chain reaction.
It was absolutely no secret that something was going to kick off one day. The times we've sat in that control room and we've had conversations about the whole system going pear-shaped. It wasn't a case of if it's going to happen, it was a case of when.
This was something that people knew was going to happen and should not have happened. And I feel very, very angry about that.
By the end of 2003, Britain's transport networks were running at many times the capacity for which they were designed. Every system was being pushed to the limit. Our roads were the most congested in Europe. Our skies were the busiest in the world. The rail network was lurching from disaster to disaster. 18 months after Potter's Bar, a fatal train crash in Edinburgh proved the final straw for the rail unions and would trigger the collapse of Britain's entire transport system.
The unions say Waverley, the fifth major rail.
Industrial action seems to be working.
Big Rick's, the train drivers' leader, was in defiance.
Our demands on safety clear. This union has a duty to its members and to the travelling public to ensure that Waverley is the last disaster of its kind. We will therefore go ahead with planned withdrawal of labour with effect from 8 a.m. Thank you very much.
Can you tell us what happened at 8 a.m? The headlines at 8 o'clock. Motoring organisations are expecting one of the busiest days ever on Britain's roads, as the country faces the first of a series of 24-hour national rail strikes.
The unions say Waverley, the fifth major rail crash in 6 years, is proof that little has changed.
Train operating companies had hoped to win a court injunction against ASLEF and RMT's planned action. But since that's failed, it looks like the network will face the first
Thousands
effective
of football
national
fans
strike.
travelling to Manchester for tonight's friendly international at Old Trafford are being urged to start
Organisations are predicting very heavy congestion, while airlines, which are running extra services, are stretched to capacity.
As the national rail strike began, Inspector Clive Turner arrived at the Surrey Traffic Control Centre. As the man in charge of the southern half of the M25, he had the unenviable task of keeping traffic moving on Britain's most congested motorway.
Oh, it was probably the busiest morning I've ever seen on the M25, and I really thought that by 8:30, 9 o'clock, something would kick off, because just from the strain of what was happening out there. To start with, it was the last Friday before Christmas and the holiday traffic and that type of thing. The other thing is that the trains were on strike and the tubes, so we had many, many more commuters on the road. Third, we had extra freight because of the train strike, there were all those extra lorries. So I was fully expecting a very, very bad day.
"400 miles north, in Edinburgh, the junior Transport Minister, Tom Walker, had spent the morning with inspectors from the Health and Safety Executive.
Principally the middle sections.
Oh, that was one of the issues raised by Southall, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was here that most of the wreckage from the Waverley crash was being examined.
I mean, this is one of the wagons that was involved in the crash, and what we're looking at is the aggregate, the spread of the weight inside. It's called the gauge load spread.
I wanted to make a point of being at the scene of the rail crash on the day of the strike, to show that we were committed, that we weren't distancing ourselves, and that we were instituting a comprehensive investigation into the causes of that crash.
On the 2nd of December, a high-speed train had collided with a derailed freight train just a few hundred yards from Waverley Station, killing the driver and 5 passengers.
There's nothing like actually seeing the carriages close up. It was very, very moving, and I have to say the executive are doing a thorough job in finding out what has happened here. Yeah.
What do you think of today's strike action, sir?
I think it is very sad that Mr. Rick sees it in the best interest of his members to call them out when we should be sitting down together and discussing this matter together to see that this should never happen again.
And what would you say to people trying to get home on the roads tonight?
Well, obviously with industrial action like this, I can only offer my sympathy. I mean, this is the busiest time of the year. And I was quite aware that the strike action was going to have a pretty bad effect on an already bad day on the roads. I mean, it was bound to create log jams. I had absolutely no idea it was going to be as bad as it was, or I probably would have flown home earlier.
A unique record of the day's events would be captured on video by 12-year-old Thomas Gault. That morning, his family set out for their Christmas holiday in Spain. They had planned to drive from their home in Basingstoke to central London and then on to Heathrow.
Marina's parents live in Bilbao, and you know, one year we spent Christmas with my parents in Brighton, and the other year we always go to Bilbao.
We're just going to go into town for a bit, because your mum wants to buy a scarf from Liberty's. For Grandma.
Marina wanted to go into the West End to pick up a silk scarf for her mum, a last-minute present, basically. She'd had this mad idea the night before, I'll just go in, pick it up, and then we can go back and get the flight. And we looked at ways of getting in, and obviously with the train and tube strikes, that wasn't an option. So we decided that we could probably drive, if we left early enough, drive in, park at a long-stay car park, pick up the scarf, drive out, and get back in time to check in for the flight.
You can wait when we get into London, all right? Are you all right for about an hour? Something like that? All right. Yeah? Good. Sure.
Pauline Watkins and her daughter Charlotte left their home in Kent an hour after the Gaults. Like thousands of other England fans, they'd set off early for that evening's friendly international, being played at Old Trafford in Manchester.
We live quite close to the motorway. We live in Swanley. So I drove up and I thought, I'll just get on at Junction 3 there, which is quite close to where we were, and just go round the M25, you know, towards Heathrow, that sort of way. My daughter Charlie is a very keen football player herself. She was part of the girls' team at her school. So I had promised her that at some point I would take her to see a match, and I had thought that this would be a really good Christmas present. She was just so excited. I got it all plotted out. I knew what I was going to do, and I just knew that it would take forever. I mean, because it always does. I try and avoid that road anyway.
Warnings from motoring organisations of complete travel chaos following today's industrial action have so far proved unfounded.
Well, Sarah, nowhere near the level of chaos that we predicted today. We're all doom-mongers, aren't we?
We are indeed. I mean, I'm just thinking of at the beginning of the year, remember when the gritting lorries came out?
Take him up for 6.
Well, I was absolutely amazed. By lunchtime, we still didn't have any major instances, and I was, thinking, nice one, Clive, you've got through the day. But just as I thought that and I was about to pat myself on the back, the phone rang.
Oh, God. Lane 1 closed, going on.
A lorry had crashed through the central reservation of the M25 and ploughed into the path of a van and several cars. The first officer to reach the accident was Tony Foster.
I can tell you how quick I was there. You can tell because people behind me were still banging into one another. I could hear them. When I got to the front of the queue, I realised that there was a young lady who was trapped and in serious difficulties. And the driver, I presume was her mother probably, appeared to be concussed.
I woke up and I was in this ambulance, and there was this guy sort of leaning over me saying, "Would you keep still, please? Keep still, because you've hurt your neck." I mean, my first thought was of Charlie, because I thought, she's not in this ambulance with me. So I said to him, "Where is she? Can you tell me where my daughter is, please?" And he said, don't worry, she's in an ambulance that's following on behind. You don't have to worry about that."
When I knew it was a crossover, I just, my heart sank. I just thought, this is it, Under those situations, we don't have any choice. I mean, like, if there's possible fatalities, then we have to preserve the scene for evidence and that sort of thing. So we had no choice, and we had to close the motorway in both directions.
Tailbacks were now growing either side of the accident at a mile a minute. By the time Clive Turner decided to close the road, the jam stretched for 10 miles, past the junction with the M23 to Gatwick. The BBC's helicopter was soon on its way to the scene with Anna Rajan, 5 Live's traffic reporter.
The sight was absolutely horrendous. I mean, not only was the accident scene pretty horrible, but what surprised me the most was the rate at which traffic started to back up along that stretch. I mean, that is a notoriously busy stretch of the M25, the Kent-Surrey stretch. But what I saw was traffic stacking up at a pace beyond belief.
Clive Turner and his team were now in a race to keep the traffic moving around the obstruction. They set a well-rehearsed official diversion through Surrey's minor roads.
To be quite honest, I mean, there wasn't a panic. We've had problems like this before. We've dealt with them 100 times before, So, I mean, it wasn't like there was panic or anything. There was just a sort of feeling of, oh God, here we go, again. And I had to cope with it in the way that we normally do, and we cope with worse.
One of the drivers forced to take the diversion was Steve Thomas, taking a chemical tanker to Swindon. He was already late for his delivery.
We come off at junction 5 and with everybody, so it's now bottlenecked right up, passing back. Then I get a call from the client asking my estimated time of arrival, and I can't really put a time on it. I said I will be there knowing deep down that, I said I'd be there at 2:30, but I was probably going to be there about 3:30. And then we just hit a brick wall. It was bumper to bumper.
That morning, workers had started digging up the water main on a stretch of the official diversion, but no one had bothered to inform the police.
Since the privatisation or deregulation of the utilities, quite often the authorities have got no more idea than we have of any roadworks. And, by the time they found out what is out there, we've got sheer chaos.
With the official diversion blocked, police sent hundreds of motorists down a hastily devised alternative route towards Kent. But within minutes, this new diversion was at a standstill.
I could see up ahead an HGV stopped. And I found it was head-on to another truck coming the other way. Very narrow lane, nowhere to go. Standing next to the truck is an officer from Kent. So I said to him, glad you're here. You can help me shift him out the way so we can get our reroute off the M25 down this route because we're stuck with waterworks over there. He said, that's funny you should say that because this is our designated reroute from Kent for the M25. So what we'd done was we'd rerouted our traffic straight into their reroute from Kent. I mean, it was a total cock-up.
This sums up policing the M25, really. There is a bit of a silly situation, I suppose, because we're in charge of the Surrey section, because we're obviously the Surrey part of the police service, and then Kent's in charge of their bit, and Berkshire's in charge of their bit, etc. But in situations like this, there's nobody in overall control. In the end, sometimes you just have to put your hands up. In fact, sometimes, at this point, I just felt like phoning up the highway authorities and saying, they're your customers, you sort it out,
By early afternoon, the conflicting diversions from Kent and Surrey meant thousands of vehicles were forming an ever larger clot of congestion, affecting all major routes crossing the area. But it wasn't just the country's roads that were under pressure on the 19th. Britain's airports were also struggling, trying to cope with millions of passengers. With extra flights laid on due to the national rail strike, the Friday before Christmas was busier than ever.
The demand for air travel has increased, so the sheer numbers of people passing through Heathrow have increased tremendously. There's no slack in the system now. There used to be. There's none anymore. When an airport's running at absolute maximum capacity like that, you have the tiniest little disruption in that tightly run system. And it's a brilliant system when it works. But my God, the slightest thing and the repercussions just spread out like this, like a ripple.
But it was not the passengers who would feel the effects of any delays most. It was the air traffic controllers guiding planes through the busiest airspace in the world. Two miles north of Heathrow, in West Drayton, controllers were already struggling with the volumes of traffic.
On a normal day at West Drayton, it is very busy. We do have a heavy workload. I remember thinking in the car, I really don't want to be late because I don't want to put anybody in a difficult position because you just can't be late for work or be sick because there just isn't the cover to cope. But eventually I got there just in time. When I walked into TC, it instantly struck me how little staff there were. When I started, I had 10 aircraft straight away. Some say it's like a game of three-dimensional chess. You have to combine what you've got on your screen with the data you're given, and then try and imagine a 3D image of what all your aircraft are doing.
At 2 p.m, there were already 40 aircraft waiting to land at Heathrow, adding to Nicola Evans' workload.
I mean, when there isn't enough space on the ground, the aircraft have to be held in a holding patterns or holds.
As the final director, Nicola Evans' job was to channel planes from the holding patterns into the final approach to the runway, where Heathrow's own controllers would take over.
The final has to nip 2 streams of traffic and ensure there's correct space between each aircraft and then hand them over to the tower. We were always under pressure to get as many planes into the approach sequence in any given time, because we were always told safety first, but delays cost money.
Shamrock 305, come off Ockham heading 300, speed 210 knots. Virgin 205, descend to altitude 3,000 feet.
1755 plus or minus 5, just at the holding point now.
Lufthansa 2693, come off landboard heading 300.
951, Challenger.
By 2:10, the accident on the M25 was causing tailbacks stretching 40 miles. Steve Thomas was one of only a few hundred drivers who managed to get through the chaos caused by the diversions and back onto the motorway.
I thought to myself, you know, at least I'm heading in the right direction. And it was funny because there was breaks in the traffic, you see. You know, at one time there was, you know, you bumper to bumper, and next time he was able to pick up a bit of speed. And I thought, well, I'm going to make some time up here. You know, with a bit of luck, I might be able to make Swindon by 4 o'clock.
When people are stuck in traffic for a very long period of time, they tend to, you know, accelerate away from it at huge speeds, especially people driving heavy goods vehicles. They're on their way to a fixed location. They've got to be there by a fixed time. That's business. So what happens is that they increase their speed, which is potentially very, very dangerous.
Still planning to go into central London despite the heavy traffic, the Galt family reached the M25 30 miles ahead of the accident. They joined a relatively free-flowing section, just a few minutes behind Steve Thomas's tanker.
We got onto the M25 and suddenly the traffic cleared, and for a while we were cruising along at 60 and it all seemed to go well, and the mood picked up and actually started feeling sort of quite festive actually, and quite excited about the whole idea, and you know, started even thinking, oh, it would be quite a laugh to go into town and see all the lights and show the kids Regent Street.
Just don't all start singing on that horrible chorus, right?
Just you wait.
It's gonna be a long, long time. Touchdown place without you to find. I'm like a man, I think I am home. Oh, no, no, no.
All right.
Rocket man, burning up my shoes out here alone.
You all right, Chris? Is everyone all right?
Dad, what are you doing?
You're all right. I think this is the car in front.
It's okay. Okay.
We could sort of hear crashing behind and screeching, and obviously people were going into the back of each other, and there was a sort of fear of like waiting there as well, just waiting for the car to hit us.
A few hundred yards ahead of the Galts, Steve Thomas's tanker had jackknifed and overturned.
I don't know if it was my fault, the accident, because I can't remember. I'm not a religious man, but I just thought, thank God, you know. You know, I got away with it, which is all you can do. If you walk away from an accident, you've got a result.
Although no one had been seriously injured, the tanker accident would cause Clive Turner an even bigger headache than the first pile-up at Junction 6.
You have to get a crane through practical gridlock to the tanker to put it upright. And then, when or if you've managed to do that, you then also have to get a tanker, in this case down from Essex, to decant the chemicals into. Now, when you've got virtual gridlock on the M25, getting a crane and a tanker through practically half of the M25 is a pretty difficult task, as I'm sure you'll understand.
Not yet.
I took a few minutes to weigh up all the options, and to be quite honest, there weren't any. So, in the end, I had to close the motorway. I suppose the feeling really was one of helplessness, because we knew that there was nothing we could do. We've now got a situation on our hands which is spiralling out of control.
The extraordinarily high volumes of traffic that day meant that soon every journey across the region would be disrupted. Even the emergency services were finding their work hampered by the growing congestion. A mile from the initial accident, the Gridlock was about to claim its first victim.
They took me to a hospital in Redhill. And I was just lying in this cubicle for hours. It seemed like hours.
After an hour, fire crews had finally freed her daughter Charlotte from the wreckage of their car. But in that time, Gridlock had enveloped most of the southern section of the M25.
Every time anyone did come in to check me, I was saying, "Where is my daughter?" And they were saying, "It's all right, just keep calm, she will be here soon." This nurse did come in, and I was sort of saying, I need to know where my daughter is, I want to know where she is. And this nurse said, "Yeah, it's all right. It took them slightly longer to get her out of the car than they thought it would, but it's okay because she's now on her way back here." This young doctor suddenly appeared through the curtain, and I just looked at his face, and he didn't say. He was obviously trying to say something, but was unable to do it. And I looked at his face, and I just knew. I don't know how. I just knew. I knew what he was going to tell me. They were giving a blood transfusion, and they said they needed to get to the hospital quickly, obviously because of this massive injury. And they drove away okay off the motorway, but I mean, it was chaos around there by that time because it was such a big pile-up. The whole area became gridlocked, and the ambulance actually was on the road for too long. They ran out of fluids, and they ran out of all the things that they needed. And she died in the ambulance about a mile away from the hospital.
By 3:30 in the afternoon, there was so much congestion on the motorway, on the M25 and on surrounding routes. Lorries, cars had to go through central London to get anywhere.
But heavy goods vehicles rerouting through the capital soon meant that central London was itself plunged into traffic chaos.
All the approaches to the M25 and thence into central London are at a standstill.
AA Road Watch said the situation in London was the worst it had ever seen. Earlier traffic...
If anything happens on the M25, there's a knock-on effect throughout the country. I mean, it's basically the biggest roundabout where all the other motorways meet, not all of them, but lots of them.
We were hearing from Godstone, from the control centre, that our incidents on the M25 were having a knock-on effect right down as far as Portsmouth and Southampton.
The M2 was a car park for lorries. The freight that was going off to the Channel Tunnel was a standstill.
Each individual incident in and of itself wasn't anything unusual. What was unusual was the combination of the effects of those, coupled with the national rail strike on that particular day.
In the Midlands and the north of the country, everyday accidents, disruption and bad weather were having a similar effect, creating gridlock on a massive scale.
It was the sheer weight of traffic that caused the problems, the unexpected problems.
M23, which is now stacked northbound from Gatwick. The M1 is starting to stack southbound. And of course, the M3, the M11, the M20 are all absolutely bulging with traffic. All national motoring organisations are wanting to keep off.
A day of havoc on Britain's roads.
Gridlock on the M25, paralysing the road network in and around London.
But the traffic chaos is not confined to the southeast.
Northbound through Yorkshire, the A1 is experiencing particular problems.
Kettering and Northampton have seen heavy congestion throughout. By further emergency bridge work being...
Chaotic traffic jams in memory.
Nightmare, completely gridlocked.
At a standstill.
Much of the surrounding coast
paralysed. Joining us on the line now is Mick Ricks. He is the General Secretary of the rail union ASLEF. Well, Mr Ricks, are you proud of bringing the country to a standstill?
Well, I don't think there's any need to be proud or vitriolic about anything. I think this action is well justified.
People were blaming the gridlock on the rail strike, but in actual fact that only loaded about another 5% of vehicles onto the road, plus some freight traffic. But we're running at such high capacity in this country that it only takes the tiniest thing to bring everything to a grinding halt. By late afternoon, this wasn't a normal situation. It wasn't even anywhere close to a normal situation. I could see the whole country coming to a standstill.
Latest on this very difficult evening, here's Sally Bozeman.
Thank you, Johnny. Well, traffic around the M25 is now virtually gridlocked following two major closures. Now, there's one between junction 7 and 4 near Orpington and M23. There's another one at junction 13 near Staines, which, by the way, may be there for some hours to come, according to police.
It came on the radio that there was going to be a long wait if you were stuck on the M25.
Stay with your vehicle! Stay with your vehicle! Stay with your vehicle!
The police would sort of come past every so often and just making announcements about everyone stay in their cars. We're dealing with the situation. Sort of bear with us, you know. It was bloody cold that day. Really, really cold. 4 hours of that. And that is a really long time to sit there, not moving.
Dad, can you turn the heater on now?
One long? You're really cold. Right, only for a bit, okay?
Yeah,
Because we're going to run out of fuel if I keep on the run.
Too cold for walk.
I think it was about 5:30 that we realised that, you know, Marina finally realised that she wasn't going to make it into town. But then there was a concern about actually getting on the flight because, you know, we weren't getting anywhere. So I said, let's try and change the flights.
Tomorrow morning, the first flight.
Thomas.
And which class of ticket is that? That's... What is the latest time we can check in? And if we miss the flight, we miss the flight. Okay.
Non-refundable, non-changeable.
No, I understand.
You know, that was it. It was either you get there or you lose it.
We're not going, are we? Yeah, we are.
I was prepared to actually write it off and think, okay, well, you know, we're not going to make it. But this really annoyed her that we'd splashed out all this money on the flights. We booked them months before. You know, it had all been planned meticulously, worked out by her when we were arriving, and I think that was her reason really for wanting to make sure that whatever happened, she was going to get us on that flight.
By 6 o'clock, the gridlock around London meant thousands of passengers had missed their scheduled flights, and many others were stuck at the airport. Essential staff, including pilots and air traffic controllers, were now stranded, unable to get to work. Staff in Heathrow's tower feared the next shift might not make it through the traffic in time.
As a supervisor, I was actually a bit worried. I was ringing the controllers to see what time they thought they were going to arrive. And one of the ground controllers said that he thought he was going to be late, and he was very worried because the state of the roads was pretty bad.
Tower controllers look after as many as 87 planes landing and taking off from the airport an hour. Heathrow normally operates with 2 parallel runways, one for arrivals and one for departures.
We would potentially have to close one of the runways and then amalgamate flights into that one runway, using the staff who had turned up.
But closing a runway would lead to the cancellation of dozens of flights and cause severe delays to those planes heading to Heathrow. Approach controllers at West Drayton would then face yet more pressure to pack planes closer without compromising safety.
But the problem is, if you put the planes too close together, then you're going to get an earful from the tower, because the plane's going to have to go around, because they wouldn't have enough time to clear the runway. Which means then that's an extra 15 minutes, because the plane's going to have to be vectored back round into the approach sequence. I mean, that used to happen once or twice a day at Heathrow. I mean, it's quite common.
I needed to take my husband, Jerry, to the airport because he had a flight that night. As part of our daily life, we tended to always be on time for things. Jerry, you know, was very strict about timekeeping and being punctual. He has to be. His flight was due out at 8:30, and it was a flight to Toulouse. Now, normally, pilots have to be at the airport about an hour and 15 minutes beforehand. But we'd been sitting on the road, on the A4, for the best part of 2 hours. And we weren't far from the airport. This was the ridiculous thing. We were only 1.5 miles or so away. And, I mean, I was really upset. I knew that we should have left earlier. I knew that we should have left when he'd said and not when I did. Jerry looked now highly likely to be late, and this was just unthinkable. He turned and basically said to me, "That's it, I'm going to walk. I'll get there on time if I walk." And in fact, it wasn't such a daft idea, because we could see other people getting out of their cars and obviously doing the same thing. So he picked up his flight bags and got out the car, slammed the door, and he just walked down the road. And that was the last time I saw him.
Good evening. On what is already being called the day Britain stopped a national rail strike, severe delays at all major airports, and this evening much of the country's roads network at a complete standstill. Tonight, with the emergency services at full stretch across several regions, we ask, is the United Kingdom facing a transport meltdown?
Well, for those just joining us, the lucky ones who've managed to battle their way home through the Christmas traffic, here's an update, at least of what I think is happening. On police advice, tonight's match has been delayed for an hour in order to try and give some of the stranded fans a bit longer to make it to the stadium.
Despite the delayed kick-off, the vast majority of the 60,000 fans heading to Old Trafford were still in their cars, adding to the ever-worsening gridlock.
Alan, it's just bedlam out there tonight.
It's definitely serious. Even when I was coming to the ground at 5 o'clock, there was major traffic problems. I mean, it's 20 minutes before the kick-off and the ground's half empty.
Sorry, I'm just going to have to interrupt you there, Alan, because actually we're now just getting word that just a minute ago the FA announced that the match is in fact going to be cancelled.
Tonight, with thousands of motorists stranded across the country, we ask, why does it take so little to bring Britain to a standstill? The Transport Secretary Alistair Darling's demanding to know why the roads network has been hit so hard by today's strike. And later in the programme, we hope to have his deputy, Tom Walker, on the line. He's been the only public face of the department today, visiting the survivors from the Waverley crash in Edinburgh.
Speaking to journalists outside Edinburgh's Royal Infirmary, the Transport Minister was still hoping to ride out the political damage caused by the strike.
You'll have about 10 minutes to put your questions to the Minister.
Good evening.
Minister, what have you got to say to those people who have been stuck in traffic for hours on end?
Well, I'm afraid when ASLEF decide to enter into a dispute like later in the day, I became aware how bad the situation of traffic was right across the country, and I have to confess to a private smile that I thought, good, the unions have asked for this. They played right into our hands, because I thought public opinion would actually change now in our favour because of the chaos that the strike on one of the busiest days of the year was causing, you know, that people were suffering pretty badly, and that would work in our favour. That, of course, was before I was aware that it was turning into something completely different, into a real tragedy on a human scale. Yes, and I would like to point out that since last December we've spent £5.5 billion in widening the roads where we thought necessary, the M1, the M6, but when ASLEF come up with I realised it was blowing up into something very bad was when I heard they'd actually cancelled the International, the football match, because that really is serious business in political terms, never mind anything else. But it was obvious things were very bad, and just after that I got a call from the department that I'd better get back down to London as soon as possible. Yes, I'm afraid no more questions.
So what Labour promised on transport?
Transport Secretary Alistair Darling has demanded an explanation. Darling summoned the Chief Executive of the Highways Agencies to his department a short time ago.
I think it is a little bit alarming that the government, 2 or 3 years...
Walker was called back to Westminster to help his boss, Alistair Darling, deal with the apparent collapse of the road's network. Barely a fortnight after the Waverley train crash, Number 10 was now feeling the heat for what was becoming the second transport disaster of the month.
Officials tell me that Alistair Darling is going to be working through the night trying to sort this mess out. And frankly, he's better off there than anywhere else, because he's not going to get home tonight, is he? Now, the opposition, perhaps predictably, are calling for his head, saying he should go over this. And even some Labour backbenchers saying maybe it's a chance for Tom Walker, maybe he should be given the job, he is next in line. But I think that's missing the point. Whether it's Darling, whether it's Walker, whether it's me or my mum, they haven't faced up to the real problem inside there, inside number 10. There are too many cars on the road.
Has there been any sign at all of emergency vehicles?
There was an ambulance had to come the wrong way on the other carriageway. That's the only thing. We've had no offers of food, no offers of blankets or anything like that.
So you've been there for sitting in the same spot for hours now. You must be very hungry, apart from anything else.
Well, yes, very hungry.
I just went to tell the bloke in front of me to turn his side lights off because I could see they were getting fainter, and I thought he was going to get a flat battery. And I've been knocking on his window, and I can't seem to wake him.
It was around that time that a woman came up and knocked on our window, who was very worried about an old man in the car behind us.
Hello, mate. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Never do the same thing.
Just going to open the door.
And he was in a bad way, and that's when it really hit me that this was something pretty serious, I think. And that, you know, something was going to have to happen, because we couldn't just keep sitting there.
Thomas, get back in the car now!
What happened?
Is it going to be okay?
I hope so. They're taking him off anyway. Just a bit of, he's feeling the cold a bit, you know.
The cold?
Yeah. All right, kids.
Okay.
What are you doing?
I think we should leave. Come on, kids. Put your hat on. Come on. Anna.
No, we can't just leave.
Why not? Everybody else is leaving.
Marina?
She worked out that we were about half a mile away from Heathrow.
Marina, we can't just leave.
But police were everywhere, you know, because they were dealing with this guy behind. So I was kind of very worried about, you know, they were telling us to stay with their cars. I mean, I'd still worried about getting arrested.
Look, they're all just getting cuffed. Anyway, the police are just there. Look, they might see us. Look, what about the presents and everything? We can't
I
just
don't
leave them.
care about the presents, okay? Doesn't matter.
Look, we can't just leave everything.
Why not? That's why we have insurance. Come on, let's get the kids are cold. Come on.
Look, all right, okay. Look, I'll come with you, all right? And then I'll come back to the car. Just hope they don't tow away in the meantime. And then maybe I can get a flight tomorrow or something.
Okay, let's go, quickly.
All right, come on.
Are you ready, Anna? Yeah?
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. Get back in the car. Wait with your vehicle. And you're in the ring. Get back in your car now.
It was descending into a kind of anarchy. I mean, just people start losing it, I think, because they'd just been there so long and it was getting so cold. some people actually trying to drive up the banks, God knows where to. Lots of deserted cars, which is a very bizarre sight on the motorway. You look round and there's, you know, lots of cars just left. So in one sense, actually, it was a sort of nice feeling to get out of that and to actually think that we were doing something other than just sitting in a car waiting for something to happen.
I told you! You're in the red, get back.
All right, sir, yeah, we're just going.
Come on, me children!
I told you, right? You've got to make sure you come with me. Stick with Mum, right? Go for it.
By about 9:45, everyone was really jumpy. Also, my replacement hadn't arrived yet. And I remember thinking, oh, here we go again, because it had happened to me a couple of times, well, more than a couple of times, while I'd been working at West Drayton. And that can be quite difficult, because the hours are restricted, because, you know, it can be extremely busy.
The next shift of controllers should now have been at work preparing to take over. Strict guidelines limiting working hours meant Nicola Evans was due to finish at 10, and in an emergency could only work on until 10:30.
Because we didn't have the cover, we were going to either have to close down airspace, and nobody wanted to do that because, you know, we had to keep the delays down to as few as we could, and otherwise we'd have to bandbox. Bandboxing is combining sectors, looking after double the amount of airspace, basically.
What you're doing as an air traffic controller is you're making a 3D model in your head so you know where everything is, how fast it's going, how high it is, what's going to happen next.
LM2826, continue descent with the glide.
That's a very complicated picture to maintain in your head. When you combine sectors, what that means is that you could be adding double the number of planes to the model. So you're just piling more information onto the model that you already have.
Dad, is that another convoy? It travels so fast.
Turn that thing off. We've just got to get there. Please, turn it off.
Why?
Because we've got to get there. We just walked about half a mile, I suppose, but it seemed quite a long way. Just through very dark, muddy fields. We could kind of see the lights of the perimeter fence way off in front, and you could see the planes coming into land. And at that point I was just thinking about how on earth we were going to get to the airport, because I didn't know, I was trying to work out where the terminals were. Just round the corner out of nowhere, these hopper buses came driving round just at the point we'd come out.
It's a bus. We're going to try and fly.
Wait.
We have to get this bus.
I ran out and flagged it.
We'll get a flight tomorrow. You've got to go. Okay, you're going to miss the flight.
Take.
Right.
Okay.
See you later. Bye-bye, darling.
Thomas!
Okay, get on. Come on, Thomas. Give me the camera. All right? See you later. Make sure you get the flight.
Yeah.
Love you. Bloody hell.
Oh, back to the car. And I was really sort of getting focused on just trying to get back as quickly as possible, because I thought they might start clearing the motorway or something, you know. And I was starting to get very worried about my car getting towed off, me coming back, and for some bizarre reason I thought I'd come back and the whole motorway would be empty and my car wouldn't be there.
But even 8 hours after traffic had first ground to a halt, police were still ordering drivers to stay in their vehicles.
It was getting much colder, and we were then seriously concerned about people who'd been in their cars for a very long time. We began to realise that the advice to stay in your car was not necessarily the most sensible one to be giving.
You know, you get to the point, especially on a cold day, like,
you know, it was on this day, where, you know, I think in the end, you know, you'd rather have abandoned cars than people dying in their cars, really.
Please leave your vehicles, lock them, and move down the hard shoulder. You'll be attacked directly.
The emergency services now realised that the situation was so grave that for the first time ever they would have to implement Operation Gridlock, a confidential plan drawn up in 1999.
Operation Gridlock is a contingency plan for evacuating people from cars when they have been sitting in motorway traffic for an hour or so, and that's in theory. In practice, we do everything we possibly can not to use this contingency. We try not to implement it because it creates a whole host of other problems with other agencies becoming involved.
Would you please leave the vehicle and follow an officer who take you to temporary accommodation? Thank you.
We have the simple logistical problem of where to put people, you know, then you've got blankets, then you've got drinks, then you've got to provide food, and, you know, just imagine, if you can, the problems that we were faced with that day. It was pretty clear to me that we were dealing with a major incident that was turning into a national disaster.
I was thinking about how utterly kind of surreal it all was, because it just seemed very bizarre that there I was on my own, standing in a muddy field in the middle of Surrey on the M25 drinking a cup of tomato soup. I was also wondering, obviously, if they got on the flight at that point. I didn't even know if the flight had left because of all the delays. And just thinking, I wonder if they're on it, I wonder how the kids are, whether they made it in time.
Pivot 482, Roger, stand by today due to a bit of ground congestion, I'll call you. Pivot 574,
Marina Galt and the children arrived at Heathrow just before 10, an hour after their plane had been due to depart. But the BA flight to Bilbao was still on the tarmac, with no guarantee that it would leave that evening, as the airport was on the verge of shutting a runway. In Heathrow's tower, Matt Ogden was still waiting for his next shift of controllers to arrive.
I was getting very concerned. Immediately I was trying to get on the phone to them, speak to them. I couldn't get through, and I knew how bad the traffic was. It was absolutely chaos out there. But at 10, the controllers did arrive on time, and we were able to complete the handover, which was a relief. It meant we weren't going to have to shut the runway down.
The BA flight to Bilbao was now cleared for pushback.
Speedbird 972, stand by for start, Brooklands Park, 6 Golf, 1173.
By 10 o'clock, everyone was hands-on. My managers, supervisors. And I felt really sorry for my supervisor because she was really under a lot of pressure to, you know, reduce the amount of delays.
Turn left heading 120 to intercept ILS runway 09 left.
Cross runway 27 left now, blocking to Speedbird.
So I volunteered to stay on just an extra half hour till 10:30.
At what should have been the end of her shift, Nicola Evans had agreed to double her workload and continue for an extra 30 minutes. As the final director, she was the last person to speak to pilots before they switched frequencies for Heathrow's tower.
About 25 past 10, I had about 15 aircraft after bandboxing.
7305, descent to altitude 3,000 feet.
I was just feeding them through into the approach sequence. At that time, I remember I had an Aer Lingus, a CSA, and a Speedbird 767. So I cleared the Aer Lingus for the approach sequence and told the pilot to contact the tower.
Shamrock 305, speed 160 knots to 4 DME, contact Heathrow Tower on 117.1.
Push approved, everyone inbound parking on the right spot.
I thought it best to tuck the CSA in behind the Aer Lingus.
Progress rate 101, contact Heathrow Tower 118.7.
About 25 past. I remember looking at my watch and thinking, you know, my relief hadn't arrived yet. And I remember looking around and there was nobody there to cover me. And then I looked back at the screen and I realised that the separation was degrading. And looked down at my strips and realised that I'd turned the CSA into approach, but I hadn't slowed it down.
The Czech CSA plane was now getting closer and closer to the Aer Lingus aircraft in front. Without adequate separation, it would have to carry out a missed approach or go around, as the Aer Lingus plane would still be on the runway.
And it sounds stupid, but the only way to contact the CSA plane was through the tower, because the pilot had already changed frequencies. So I pressed the button to contact the tower.
Nicola Evans needed to warn the tower of the impending missed approach, but the controller in charge of landing was busy trying to get the Aer Lingus plane clear of the runway.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London. For your own safety, please remain...
At the same time, his colleague in charge of takeoffs cleared the BA flight to Bilbao for departure on the parallel runway, unaware that there was a potential missed approach.
Speedbird 412, wind 080, 10 knots, cleared for takeoff.
And then it just carried on ringing and ringing. I just thought, oh, you know, I've got to contact them and I've got to get through to them. I pressed the button for the priority line, and that was ringing and ringing, and it must have only been a few seconds, but it just felt like forever. And by that time they picked up and they realised that they had a problem and that this CSA was going to have to go around.
I'd like to thank you for flying with Aer Lingus.
As the Czech plane was only seconds from touchdown, the pilot was told to abort his landing.
CSA 101, go around. I say again, go around.
The aircraft was now climbing directly into the flight path of the BA plane.
Bloody hell.
We had a call saying there was an incident at Heathrow. We immediately turned the ambulance around and I could see this huge red-orange glow of fire on the horizon.
And we're just getting reports of a large explosion in the west of London.
Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but we're getting reports of a huge explosion west of London.
That 2 planes have collided over London.
And wreckage has been sighted coming down in the Houndslow area of West London.
I'm sorry, we've no word yet on casualties.
With the main arteries across London gridlocked, the emergency services had to struggle to the scene using minor roads. By the time they reached the first of the many crash sites, burning wreckage and aviation fuel had started dozens of fires in residential streets across Hounslow and Boston Manor.
Jesus, Knight, the same instant, Knight pumps 10.
Status free. Over.
Let this boy set it for a cabin jet, he renders fuselage, right?
As soon as the people saw an ambulance, they just ran towards us. I remember vividly a chap coming with a massive head wound, running right in front of the ambulance to get help, basically.
Nice deep breaths for me.
Well, on the line now, we have an eyewitness who's very close to where the wreckage came down, Sam Wilkes, who lives just a few streets away. So what did you see?
I just was taking the rubbish out the front of my house, and I heard the explosion and everything shook, you know, it almost knocked me off of my feet. And straight away, there was thick smoke everywhere. I couldn't see anything, and I ran into the house, and then my neighbour, he was banging on the door, he was trying to get everybody out of the house. He was just running up and down the street, and everybody was running out of their houses. It was just chaos, you know.
Well, you sound very shaken up. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. What can you see now? What's happening now?
Well, we've been moved out of the area now, but there's ambulances everywhere, and I can still see all the flames now from where I am.
Just get him in and we'll check.
We all thought it was a terrorist attack. That was the general feedback that was going through all the paramedics, all the different services there. And since 9/11, all the training drills that we have undertaken have been related to terrorist attacks. What was going through everyone's mind was, are there more planes coming down?
The 2 planes had collided at a height of 1,800 feet, a mile east of the airport perimeter. Heathrow could commit its own fire services to the rescue effort, but that would mean shutting the airport indefinitely, which in itself could be catastrophic.
There are options you can take. My option at that point was, we've got to do it. The fire crew had to go and deal with the incident, which had happened outside the airport. So we had no fire cover at Heathrow. We had to close the airport. There was no option.
But with Heathrow shut, Dominic Steele feared that there wouldn't be enough landing slots in the southeast for the 40 planes holding in the sky above the airport. And with emergency fuel reserves cut in the name of economy, the planes might not make it to airports further afield.
It has to be, I'd say, the worst hour of my life. When you take a decision like that, you're faced with the consequences. You know that those aeroplanes are up in the sky. They've got to land somewhere before the fuel runs out.
On one of the planes scrambling to find alternative landing slots was the junior Transport Minister, Tom Walker, on his way back from Edinburgh.
We got to Heathrow and we started circling in a stack for about half an hour. And the pilot came on and said it was due to air traffic control delays. And then I became aware of a sort of stir on the other side of the plane, that people were looking out of the window and things like that. And then the pilot came on and said we'd been diverted to Gatwick. And my secretary, Jonathan, who's a bit of a plane enthusiast, he looked very uneasy at that. He went white as a sheet. So I said, "Yeah, are you okay?" And he looked at his watch and just said, "I hope to God we got enough fuel," which was not something I'd thought about.
With the UK's busiest airport closed and the National Air Traffic Control System at breaking point, supervisors in West Drayton took the next step. After one call to European air traffic control in Brussels, Britain's airspace was closed until further notice.
It was only when we got more information from the police helicopter that we actually found out where the actual crash site had finished, and it was huge.
The two planes had left a wreckage trail scarring 3 miles of West London.
At approximately 10:29 this evening, 2 aircraft, a British Airways flight BA112 and a CSA check plane were in collision over Houndslow. It's still not clear how the accident happened, nor do we have any figures yet for the number of passengers and crew on board. I'm not able to give you any further details at this time. There will be a full briefing at 1 a.m. at the Heathrow Airport Press Centre. Thank you.
How wide now is the crash site?
Jane Newell arrived home in Shepperton with her daughter Stephanie, 8 hours after leaving to take her husband Jerry to the airport.
It had taken us over 3 hours from dropping Jerry off. And I was just so relieved to be back home and to shut the door on the day. It had been a dreadful day. I went into the living room and turned the television on for company, I suppose. And there was just a picture of a tail fin.
Up to 50 people are feared dead tonight, including at least 12 on the ground after a passenger airliner and a cargo...
And it just had airline disaster written across the bottom of the screen. And
The crash came at the end of a day that has seen reports of...
I didn't actually believe it was real to begin with.
Gridlock affecting much of the motorway.
Until I just thought, this is real. I've got to telephone. So I ran into the hall where the phone is, picked it up and started dialing every number that I've got for Heathrow.
I don't think I could describe to you how I was feeling or what I was thinking at that point. I was relieved from my workstation and I was led down to the director's office where I would be interviewed by the Metropolitan Police. I just felt sick. Really sick. I just thought, what have I done? What have I done?
On the other side of London, news of the accident came as no surprise to one of aviation's leading experts. Britain has a strong record of air traffic control safety, but despite this, he'd been predicting just such a disaster for over a decade.
I was going to the pub, in fact, and I had a phone call from Alan, who works in the office, and he said, are you watching television? And I said, no, I'm not watching television. And he said that a couple of planes had come down. And my first response was to ask him where, and he told me Houndslow. Knowing where the planes had come down made me realize almost immediately what would have been the cause of that. To a degree, I kind of feel like I'm like the Cassandra of the aviation industry, so I've been prophesying doom and gloom, and those prophecies have been falling on deaf ears.
Maybe 40, 50 times I was trying, and it was well over half an hour by the time I did get through to someone. A woman from Surface Air, I think, who actually had no information at all. And, I mean, I was desperate by this time. I did, I'm afraid, shout at her and say, I must know something. My husband's a pilot. He was on the Toulouse flight. Please tell me something. Eventually the woman came back and said, it's all right, it's the flight to Bilbao. I was virtually crying. I was so pleased it wasn't Jerry's flight. And then the phone rang again. I thought, you know, it had to be Jerry. He'd heard, and he was just going to phone and tell us it was all right. But it wasn't. It was the airline. And a very, very softly spoken man introduced himself. He said he was very sorry, but normally they'd send someone round in person. And I just stopped him. I said, no, it's all right, it's okay. You know, I've spoken to someone, and Jerry's fine. It's okay, you've got the wrong person. And then there was a silence. And he said, yes, but the Toulouse flight was cancelled, and Jerry's flight was the one to Bilbao. Stephanie was just staring at me. She couldn't hear what they were saying. But she knew.
The air traffic confusion immediately after the accident meant Tom Walker's plane was initially diverted to Gatwick, only to find on arrival that so many other planes had been sent there, it would have to be redirected again.
It was very unsettling, quite honestly. It was very nervous-making. Then we were told that we were going to divert again, and the pilot said he was going to try and land at Luton, and I could see that Jonathan was then very, very unsettled and nervous. And as a passenger, you're completely powerless. You're sitting there and you're never aware how close to an emergency you might be. So when we did land at Luton, which was quite a bumpy one, we were all very relieved. You know, everyone cheered, and we got out through arrivals, and there was a great crowd of people around one of those big TV screens up on the wall, and they were watching the news, and that was the first clue I'd had that something terrible had occurred.
Up to 50 people are feared dead tonight, including at least 12 on the ground after a passenger airliner and a cargo plane collided in mid-air over the Houndslow area of West London.
The crash came at the end of a day that has seen reports of fatalities caused by the unprecedented gridlock affecting much of the motorway network.
Se ha sabido también que a bordo viajaban varios españoles cuyas identidades por el momento se desconocen.
It seems most unlikely that anyone on either of the planes could have survived this crash. There's wreckage everywhere, some of it still burning, and there's a strong smell of aviation fuel in the air.
At one of the many temporary shelters set up around the M25, Julian Galt was about to learn of the crash.
News flashes started coming over the radio about an air crash at Heathrow, with very few details at that point of what it was. And they immediately started giving out a number to call. And eventually I get through and speak to this woman, and she said to me it was the BA flight to Bilbao. Just asked her straight, I said, right, were they on the flight? And I just heard her start crying.
Death toll from yesterday's mid-air collision over London is 87. The disaster came at the end of a day that had already seen unprecedented congestion levels on Britain's roads, leading to a humanitarian crisis. Thousands of drivers were forced to spend a night of sub-zero temperatures in their cars across the country.
I decided to go out and actually have a look. You know, we were only on the edge of the motorway, the control room, so I went out and had a walk on the slab, as it were. It's probably the most surreal thing I've ever witnessed, because there was the M25, and for the last few years of my life, been watching cars zooming around, you know, and it's been this sort of like continuous humdrum noise of traffic. And there was a sort of deafening silence and abandoned vehicles. There were people starting to turn up and reclaim their cars, and there were sort of like passages now where we could get tow trucks through and move things out the way, and that was starting to happen, but it was obviously not going to take, you know, a day, 2 days, it was going to take weeks.
As police and the army struggled with the logistical nightmare of clearing the roads, the impact of the nationwide gridlock began to emerge. 5 people had died from hypothermia. Tens of thousands had been trapped in their cars overnight, and nearly 1 million vehicles were still abandoned on the motorways. 64 passengers and crew had died in the mid-air collision, and 23 had perished on the ground. But it was remarkable that the death toll was not even higher. Burning wreckage and fuel from the collision had destroyed 35 buildings and caused damage to dozens more.
It's just after 8:10, and on the line is Tom Walker, the Transport Minister. Do you have any idea at the moment what the cause might have been?
Well, I'm afraid it's far too early to get a full picture of the precise causes of the disasters. I just come from the crash site. The emergency workers are still searching through the debris. It's clear they're going to be doing so for a very long time yet. But I'd like to pay tribute to their courage and tireless efforts. It's been a desperately difficult time for everyone. But
the House went into recess yesterday. Do you think Parliament now should be recalled? A lot of people will feel this.
Yes, well, I certainly feel that the whole Parliament want to address the problem as soon as possible, John, possibly before Christmas, but to express our collective sympathies. But I really can't speak.
Statement, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I know that the whole House will wish to join me to convey our shock and heartfelt sympathies over the tragic air accident which has led to the loss of so many lives. Our thoughts and prayers are with the families, friends and relatives of those who died or were injured. There must be the fullest possible inquiry into how the accident occurred.
The 3 air traffic controllers whom it's alleged may have been responsible for the Houndslow air disaster face charges of multiple manslaughter. Nicola Evans, Rick Sullivan and Dolan Cannell were all working for National Air Traffic Services last December when the BA jet collided with a Czech.
One man would hold the key to their defence. Daniel Boyd had been appointed as an investigator by the Czech authorities within hours of the crash. But in October, he was contacted by Nicola Evans' defence team. What Boyd revealed in the first meeting with Nicola and her lawyers would dramatically change her understanding of the disaster.
He leant over to the man next to him and said, it was just like Carrie's incident. And I just thought, God, this happened before.
There was an incident in 1997, which was known in the industry as Carrie's incident, because there was an air traffic controller called Carrie. This wasn't a collision, it was a near miss, so nobody was killed, but it was a very close near miss. And as now, in 97, this woman, Carrie, was forced to shoulder the blame for something that could have been a monumental disaster. And I could see exactly the same thing happening now. For years, I have been banging at the door of the industry saying, this is not human failure. This is not Carrie's fault, or this is not Nicola Evans's fault. It's not the air traffic controller's fault. It's the fault of the system. And I should know, because NATS commissioned me to write a report looking at the parallel runway operation at Heathrow. And there were certain aspects that gave me great cause for concern, and the key thing, which is connected to the December the 19th incident, was this issue of the missed approach procedure.
There are hundreds of missed approaches a year at Heathrow, a figure that's grown with rising air traffic volumes. The missed approach procedures are designed and regulated by the Civil Aviation Authority. But long before Carrie's incident, Boyd had identified problems in work he did for National Air Traffic Services.
When I found that out, I was feeling very angry. We were never told that the missed approach procedure, could be dangerous, and that I had shouldered much of the blame, and there were other parties that were to blame, not only myself, and that I'd taken the brunt of it all.
But although NATS drew Boyd's findings to the attention of the Civil Aviation Authority, no significant changes were made to the procedures until Carrie's incident itself. And even then, Boyd believed the changes put in place meant the risk of a mid-air collision was left unacceptably high.
Well, very clearly we are all in denial, collective denial about capacity. People say to me, but surely the aviation industry is different from other transport industries in that they're led by safety and that they're open and they're above board. And my response to that is, you must be joking, don't make me laugh. I have walked through the wreckage of many planes, too many planes than I care to remember, around the world, and have seen the sort of human cost and the tragedy connected with these things.
In a dramatic development this afternoon, the Houndslow air disaster trial collapsed. The prosecution dropped manslaughter charges brought against the 3 air traffic controllers blamed for the tragedy in which 87 people died.
5 days into the trial, Daniel Boyd's evidence had caused the Crown's case to collapse.
Miss Evans offers all her condolences to the bereaved and injured and to all those affected by this terrible event. Not a day goes by without Nicola reliving this terrible accident. If Nicola could turn back the clock, she would. Nicola would also like to say that she is personally relieved that the prosecution, albeit very late in the day, have seen sense and dropped this case against her. Nicola is particularly anxious that the pending public inquiry should finally start as soon as possible and help prevent this accident ever happening again, and also to find out those who are truly responsible. Thank you.
One year on, a service was held at St Bride's Church in central London in memory of those who had died in the accident.
It soon became clear to me after the accident that although people were talking about that day being a turning point, a sea change, that for anything to be different was going to take a struggle. The awkward thing, is if you want to look in the long term, that you have to throw a lot of money at transport and you won't see the benefit for so long that politically it's anathema. And that really was the problem, I think.
Tom Walker resigned from his position as Junior Transport Minister in March of 2004.
Well, I felt then, I feel now that the 19th, we had it coming. That basically we had it coming because unlike other European countries, we don't put a reasonable amount of public funds into transport.
I think everybody had this perception of the airline industry in Britain being very, very safe. But this was not an accident, it was something that was going to happen. It was just a question of which two planes it was and where it happened. And unless something is done about the sheer weight of traffic, pressure put on air traffic control staff, there will be another December the 19th.
It was very difficult for me to see the victims' families there. After the court case, the headlines in the newspapers were saying that I'd been portrayed as a victim and I was no victim because what had I lost? I hadn't lost a loved one or anything, and it's not really about what I've lost. You know, it's what I've got to live with.
To watch an interview with the programme makers about the detailed research behind tonight's programme, log on to bbc.co.uk/Britain Stopped, or digital satellite viewers can press the red button now. Newsnight discusses the issues raised in The Day Britain Stopped here on BBC Two next.